It's like a dream, but you're not asleep, but you're not awake. Every turn I contemplate down to the valley, misery, where all it does is justify your reason to wake up. Trying, but it's never enough.
Yes, and yes. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, you know who I am. I'm the sexy one. I am the fallen one. I got a bunch of nicknames. I am Azazel. And we're here tonight to talk about something a little special. Just a little bit special tonight. So, I do have a guest. Maybe he'll make it out of here. Maybe he won't. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it is time for me, that would be me, to introduce my guest, Sir Kyle Cobb. Hi, Kyle.
Good evening and salutations.
And all of that good stuff, too. So, let me read down real quick before we do our normal thing. Was picking Cindy, Carr, Adam, Emily. That'll be Emily Rose. Aradell, how you doing? Chad. We have a Chad in here. Hi, Chad. Ryan was picking. You're Aaron White. Okay. Was picking Justin. Nitro, Mark. And I think about got all you. Charles, I see you in here. Hi, Melissa. So, before we get into all this Bell Witch stuff, you know how we do. Pick up your glasses, no matter what it is. If you don't have a cup, if you don't have a shot, get the dog bowl, take the baby's bottle out of its mouth. Do what you got to do. At the count of 3, let's give a cheers to Hellfire Entertainment. Are you ready?
Absolutely.
I said, are you ready? So for the 16 in attendance and the millions that are going to watch us around the world, here's to you, Hellfire Entertainment. Cheers.
Salud.
Oh. And of course, my shot was brought to you by Pete Shine. I got about 2 more shots in here. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're here with Sir Kyle Cobb talking about the true story of the Bell Witch. So let me throw this up real quick. Because I'm a good guy. This is his book. Screenshot it, take a picture. I want everybody to buy this as soon as we get out of here. But you got to watch this. You got to watch this first. But as soon as we get out of here, everybody needs to buy this book or that book. I don't know, somewhere over here. That book. So, Sir Kyle, start us off. What made you want to write this book?
It was actually, this particular book was a challenge. I had just written my paranormal textbook, and as part of that, I looked into the Bell Witch a little bit. And the more I looked into it, the more the story began to fall apart. So I'm one of these folks who, as a historian and a paranormal investigator and a demonologist, I want to know what the truth is. I don't care what the truth is. I just want to know what the truth is. And so I don't care if I break some eggs along the way, and I look at whatever the real historical record is behind paranormal type activities. The Bell Witch is really a famous story, particularly in Adams, Tennessee, which is where the story originates. But it also gained international standing when the Psychological Society in Britain included it in their list of poltergeists around the 1912, 1914. And so it's been considered a long-standing paranormal event. Like I said, they classified it as a poltergeist. And for, I guess, roughly 100 years, it was considered the only paranormal entity to have, quote-unquote, killed a person as part of the legend. And so I wanted to get involved and understand the truth. And so I actually went through their entire poltergeist list, and one by one, went through each one of the cases, and where possible, dug up the historical evidence. I found that actually some of their cases that they had included from the U.S. weren't even possible. They referenced locations that didn't exist, people that didn't exist. And
Wow.
In this particular case, it gained fame because a gentleman named Martin Van Buren Ingram in 1896 wrote the book about the Bell Witch. And so that was kind of my starting point. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Bell Witch, basically the story is that, well, I mentioned Martin Van Buren Ingram wrote it. First of all, let me back up. I know I'm kind of stumbling here. Don't buy the book. Don't run out and buy Martin Van Buren Ingram's book on the Bell Witch. You can get it for free. Google it. So you can find a PDF of it. It's public domain. All the folks that are selling it to you on Amazon have basically downloaded the public domain and are printing it, and it's charging you for it. So Van Buren Ingram, he wrote this book, and he tells the story of an entity that manifests in a little place called Adams, Tennessee. This isn't the first mention of the Bell Witch, I should say. A couple of years earlier, in 1886, there's a book published called The History of Tennessee. And it's an actual state history publication. And slipped into it, there's the story of an entity that occurs in Adams, Tennessee. The thing about it is there is no mention in it of a murder. There's no mention of it as anything. It's referred to more as a curiosity in the first mention. Van Buren Ingram's case, he takes a different stance. So basically, to just kind of run through the history for those of you who haven't read the Bell Witch book, the idea is in 1817, a gentleman by the name of John Bell and his family have relocated from North Carolina to Adams, Tennessee. And Adams, Tennessee, by the way, is north and west of Nashville. And at the time, it was very, very rural. It had just basically They had just run the Native Americans, the Shawnee, had just been cleared out of the area. So it was still very much wild territory. The people that were moving there had no idea what animals they would encounter. It was very, very quote unquote Wild West, literally. So the Bells settle on their granted land. That's part of the settlers' bonus. If everybody who went there was granted a plat of land, about 200 acres roughly. The Bells got cheated a little bit because part of their property borders on the Red River. But they set up a farm. And in the story, and I use the term story because that's really what this is. It starts out as a legend. John Bell starts seeing strange animals. One of the animals is described as a rabbit with a dog's body. There is an encounter with one of his sons that encounters a large unknown fowl, probably a turkey, but we won't argue with that one. His daughter encounters a girl swinging in a swing all dressed in green. One of his slaves encounters a black dog over and over again. So that's kind of the beginning of the story. And as it escalates, there's a situation where they hear knocking on their cabin walls. Now, bear in mind, these are what's called a double cabin. So they're actually two rooms that are joined by a little walkway. And that really is all the cabin is. But the thing that's curious about the knocking on the walls is these are timbers, not like milled. They're logs. So it's like a log cabin. So knocking on it's kind of in and of itself kind of a questionable assertion. But the idea is they start hearing the knocking. And from there, John Bell mysteriously gets ill. And he describes it as feeling like there was a stick stuck in his mouth. And he can't eat. When he tries to eat, it feels like it's being pushed out. And so for about a year, John Bell experiences this, again, according to the story. The children also begin are just experiencing what they describe as their hair being pulled and covers being pulled off of their beds. Eventually, this, over the weeks, progresses, and they start hearing a whispering voice. And it eventually gets louder and louder. It also takes particular focus on other visitors to the Bell farm. And one of the people it pokes fun at, for instance, is the priest that, or the preacher, not a priest, the preacher who the Bells are attending his church. It refers to him, it will actually taunt in the middle of his sermons and say, "Lord, how does that old sugar mouth go on? How I love to hear him pray." Like the entity is actually in church critiquing his service. But more on the dangerous side, the entity also starts to say things like, old Jack, speaking of John Bell, old Jack needs to die. And so that becomes something of a concern to everyone in the family. The entity also particularly focuses on John's young daughter. Her name was Betsy Bell, and at the time of the incidents that they start occurring, she's about 12 years old. And she already, at that point, she has kind of a fixation for school teachers. So she actually dates one school teacher and later in life marries her second school teacher.
Wow.
And they age 12, that's marrying age in Tennessee in the early 1800s.
How was you when you had to drink coffee?
Well, absolutely.
Nah.
You can drink coffee at any age.
Let me show you an age of drinking coffee.
Everyone thinks because you're a zombie, you don't know good coffee. Well, they're wrong. We have very active lifestyles. It's not all wandering the countryside aimlessly or scaring passing motorists. And we all love a good cup of joe. And there's only one brew that gets my seal of approval. Deadly Grounds coffee is my guilty pleasure. Bold, robust, delicious. It's coffee that can wake the dead. With over a dozen different roasts and flavors, Deadly Grounds can satisfy the most finicky of coffee addicts. The aroma is so intoxicating. It brings all of my neighbors out of the woodwork. Deadly Grounds coffee. Coffee to die for and zombie approved. It's good to get a little deadly. Use the front door! Oh, they're so disgusting.
Well, I mean, you got to drink your coffee.
Well, I hear that coffee's so good you want a double tap of it.
I know, right? I like that. Double tap. Double tap. But I see all that real quick before you get back into it, Kyle. Lacey, I see you're gone. Beth, hello. Kyle, another Kyle, hello. Ian, I see you in there. David, what's picking? Nikki, what's picking? All right. So go ahead, sir.
Okay. So the entity begins to be more and more manifest over time. And the part of it that becomes, I guess, almost surreal is lots of members of the community begin interacting with this. When the whiskey in the storehouse suddenly disappears, it's that the entity, they refer to her as Kate, it's that the entity drank the whiskey or drank the rum.
Wow.
Not that somebody got to it. When there is domestic disputes, it's not that two people are arguing, it's that the entity got them to argue. So more and more the entity, at least in the legend, becomes a catalyst for chaos.
I'm going to have to use that.
Catalyst for chaos.
No, the entity made me do it.
Well, one of the things that the entity does is she at one point tells folks that there's an Indian treasure on the Bell property. And so she sends these people out hunting around the property, and they go and they go to the place that the entity told them, and they dig and they dig and they dig and they dig and they dig. And after hours of digging, they find absolutely nothing, and allegedly the entity just laughs.
Right.
And this is the kind of thing that's constantly going on. I mentioned that Betsy Bell had a fixation for teachers. At this point in time, she has an 18-year-old teacher named Joshua Gardner, and he also becomes kind of a focal point, allegedly, for the entity. It starts terrorizing him, it starts taunting him, and the entity constantly tells Betsy that she shouldn't marry Garner and that she needs to stop dating him. He also, the entity tells Gardner that if he doesn't stop dating Betsy, that it will hurt her.
Wow.
And Betsy then experiences sensations of like being stuck all over the body with pins. Also, she has fainting spells and seizures. We would say this is possibly epilepsy from today's standard. There is also, I mentioned Reverend Gunn, who is the local preacher. And the entity, again, takes particular focus on him. And as I mentioned before, it taunts him every chance it gets. I want to also mention, they call the entity Kate, but there's another Kate involved in the story. John Bell's wife's sister is Katie Batts. And she becomes kind of portrayed, I guess, in the folklore as the bad guy. That in some way, shape, or form, the entity is as a result of some form of witchcraft that Katie has possibly created. Let me back up. One of the things I always get asked is, where's the witch in the Bell Witch? The truth is that there isn't one. In the actual story, the terminology witch means magic, unexplained. So it's the Bell's unexplained events. It's their magical witchery type event.
All right.
So I mentioned Kate Batts. In the book, she's characterized as being rich. She rides around with her own slaves, and she rides a donkey collecting pittance which is the tie-in to the Betsy getting stuck by pins. However, I'm going to back up in a minute and I'm going to tell you the real story. So over time, the entity gets worse and worse and worse. At one point, it splits into 4 different entities. And these are almost like split personalities. And they'll argue with each other and create just general pandemonium.
That sounds like me every day.
Well, hey, if the shoe fits,
Oh,
make it a
it
clown
fits.
shoe and wear it.
That's good.
The entity also particularly took a toll on the slaves. It went after them deliberately and injured them. It would torture them. It would taunt them. There's a story of it chasing one of the slaves into the house. And as part of that, the slave hid under John's wife's bed. Lucy is the wife. And it then berates Lucy for hiding a quote-unquote smelly slave. So it's really offensive as general. From today's modern interpretation of the John Bell illness, however, it could the fact that he had trouble eating and just doing a lot of swallowing of things, it actually could be something as simple as a really bad tooth. They didn't have modern medicine, and an infection in the tooth can actually cause some of these symptoms. There are also some severe medical problems that can tie into that. I'll just mention a couple other little anecdotal things. There's a guy named William Porter who becomes the Ghostbuster in the story, who actually the entity comes to taunt him, and it will lay down next to him at night and try to sleep. And so he kind of lays a trap and then catches it in a blanket, and he's going to throw the blanket in the fire. But as every step he takes toward the fire, his body gets heavier and the blanket gets heavier until he can't make it to the fire.
Right.
He also runs into a doppelganger that looks just like his wife, Elizabeth, but it's actually the entity. There's stories of the transformation of the entity imitating other folks in the community. So as we get toward the punchline of the story, John Bell eventually is so weak he becomes bedridden, and they're administering him medicines. One day he starts to have an extremely adverse reaction, December 19th of 1820, and he's literally dying. The entity then tells the folks, look at the medicine you've been giving him. I've switched it out. It's poison.
Oh, wow.
And so that's why the entity is credited with the first death of a person from a paranormal perspective. So it hangs around for a little while longer, for about another 5-6 months, and then it leaves and says it'll return in 1828, and the children eventually get the cabin. Allegedly it does return, but there's not really a story around that, at least included in this book. And Betsy runs off. She dumps Joshua Gardner and actually marries another school teacher that took his place. So that's the quick version of the Bell Witch story. Now, my job is to then take this historical legend and break it apart. What's the truth? So we start at the very beginning of the story. I start by looking at John Bell himself. Is he a real person? What do we know about him? Well, he is a real person. So John Bell was born in 1750. He lived in the Carolinas in a place called Halifax County. He was trained as what's called a cooper, which is they make barrels. And he married his wife Lucy, 1772, not 1872. And as part of the story, one of the things that happens is that he actually murders a man. There's an incident. John moves from being a barrel maker to actually a slave trader. And he gets in a dispute in the Carolinas. He actually kills a man. And as part of the agreement not to send him to the jail for the rest of eternity, they have to leave. And so that's why the Bell family picks up in a wagon train and heads from civilized Halifax, North Carolina, to the frontier of Adams, Tennessee. And when they do that, they take along with them several of their family members. I mentioned Kate Batts. Well, her and her husband accompany them in a different wagon. And those are all real things that have happened. They're historically backed up. So the Bells go to Adams, Tennessee. John is a slave trader. We know for certain that John wasn't a good man, not just because he's a slave trader, but he picks fights. One of the things he ends up doing is he gets in an argument with Kate Batt's brother, so his wife's sister's brother, so a relative.
Wow.
And he ends up over a slave. They make an agreement to he's going to sell it to his relative, and the relative first says yes, but then his wife basically tells him, no, we don't have the money, we're poor. And he wants to cancel the deal. Well, John Bell says, no, you can't cancel the deal. You have to pay me 50% of what we agreed to cancel it. And under they're what's called Primitive Baptist. Under that code, you can't charge interest on a loan or any kind of extra fees. That's considered usury, and that's prohibited by the church. And it also was illegal in the territory of what would be Tennessee.
Wow.
And so as a result, the church has a trial. Initially, they consider excommunicating him, but then they decide, no, it wasn't that great a problem. But then the court itself takes up the case and finds him guilty of usury. And then the church is like, yeah, we really meant to find him guilty. And so the Bell family is excommunicated from their church. Now, this plays an important factor as we start to unravel the story. Before I go deeper into it, let me just throw out a couple things out that I didn't mention. So the way the book is written, the famous Bell Witch book, it's written in 3 parts by Van Buren Ingram. Part 1, here's the story of the Bell Witch. Okay. Part 2, in case you didn't believe part 1, here's a super secret diary written in 1846 by one of the Bell children that verifies everything I've just told you. Okay. Part 3. If you didn't believe part 1 or part 2, here's a whole section of letters from dead people that you cannot possibly verify are authentic.
Right.
Confirming all of the stories and also giving some extra fluff to it.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, as we start looking at this, already there's something that smells a little bit rotten in the story. So one of the things I mentioned before, at least the story tells us, that Kate Batts was a rich woman. Well, the truth is completely opposite. When she and her husband went with John and his family to Adams, right after they got there, her husband fell. He was trying to cut apples or get apples off an apple tree, and the ladder went out from under him, and he was paralyzed from the waist down.
Wow.
So not only did they not have slaves, but literally his wife had to work the fields to feed the family. And so there was no extravagant wealth. But the book by Van Buren Ingram was written 60 years after the fact. So he really didn't know the stories of the individuals involved. He just knew names. And then he kind of made the story up as he went along.
Wow.
So that kind of gets us to the next step in the process.
All right, before you get there, we have to take a little commercial break.
Hey, I'm ready, brother.
Sponsors got a sponsor. All right, we'll be right back. Yeah.
That's cool.
And
I thought
they forgot the most important part.
you.
Azazel on a stripper pole with nothing but leather thong on and the mask.
My eyes,
That's what hey, they gotta make it rain up in there.
my eyes.
What's picking, Kofi? Steven, I can't even pronounce that last name. Said hi, Kyle. Can you see it?
No.
Uh, Zinger, G-E-T, Zinger. Said hello. I said hi, Kyle.
Oh, hi there. Cheers.
All right, but go ahead. Keep on going.
Oh,
But we only have 30 minutes left, just to let you know.
I work best under pressure.
I know.
Okay, so let me preface this by saying I'm probably one of the few people in the world. I'm banned for life from the Bell Witch tourist trap. I mean, the Bell Witch Cave. So I mentioned before, I don't care what the truth is. I just want to know what the truth is and share it. So as I dig into the story of the Bell Witch, what are the things I do know? Well, it's written in 3 parts, right? I know that the diary is allegedly written in 1846 because that's what the book tells us. And so the first thing I do, I'm kind of a computer nerd, and the entire book, again, it's public domain, and so you can download the text versions of it. I took it and I wrote a quick program that went through and looked up every single word in the diary. Oh, yeah. Reach out and touch someone.
I did.
And, it will, by looking up every single word in the diary, I could also find the word origins, the dates that word became a contemporary word. Because as you're reading it, there's some anomalies. And what you find is there's a whole bunch of words in this 1846 diary that are anachronistic. They didn't exist in that form in 1846. A great word example is the word detective. We think of it as detective. Hey, that's common. The idea of detective as a noun really enters the English language when we talk about like the Pinkertons. They were detectives. To detect was something. The idea of detecting was something. But the idea of a person's title being a detective in the American English didn't exist in 1846. But it did when the book was written in the 1880s. So immediately that raises a red flag. And that's not the only word. There are literally hundreds of them. The next thing I did in trying to solve this mystery is I said, well, let me take the rest of the book. And let me take phraseology from the different sections. Remember, it's supposed to be 3 different sets of people. Part 1 is supposed to be written by Ingram. Part 2 is supposed to be written by a Bell child. Part 3 are supposed to be random letters from a bunch of people that are dead. All 3 sections have quirky, weird phraseology that's in common. They refer to it, there's a point where it's talking about the entities drinking. And it's referred to as a carnival of alcohol or a carnival of debauchery. And these weren't common phrases in the 1840s, but the fact that different individuals are using that same similar phrases in the different works is kind of an idea that there's a problem. The other thing we find when we read the book, if you are a Freemason or anything familiar with that, there are a lot of hidden jokes or hidden rituals in the first part of the Bell Witch book to tap Masons or to kind of let Masons know, hey, there's something up. A good example is when the entity directs the people to where the hidden treasures are or the hidden Indian graves are. It actually gives them the directions that's used as part of one of the first Mason initiation rituals. And so, again, something that's not expected if it's a historical book that's telling us what's going on. So with those type things in mind, it suddenly becomes an idea that maybe there's something else going on here. One of the things that is told us in the story is that there is a Saturday Evening Post article written. This is told us in the letters section that it says it was such a famous case. Everybody across the U.S. knew it. And it was so famous that a story in the Saturday Evening Post talks about it. Well, in the 1890s, getting a copy of every Saturday Evening Post was impossible. But now that we have the internet, we can actually get a hold of every single Saturday Evening Post ever published. And so I literally went from 10 years before the Bell incident until 30 years after.
Wow.
And there's not a single mention of the entity. Also, if it was this famous event, contemporary newspapers would have covered it. So we're lucky that the Nashville paper is online in its entirety for this period. Also, just down the street, there happens to be a newspaper called the Tobacco Leaf. Now, I mention the Tobacco Leaf because it has a particular prominence in our little tale. Neither of these newspapers, by the way, have a single mention of the Bell entity. But when we're talking about the Tobacco Leaf, we end up finding out that Martin Van Buren Ingram lives in a particularly tiny town in Tennessee called Clarksville. He happens to work at the Tobacco Leaf newspaper. So his own newspaper didn't cover the story. At this time, in the 1880s, Clarksville had a population of...
What happened? Where'd he go? Kyle. Come back. Come back wherever you are. Kyle. Maybe he'll come back, but let's keep on going. I have no idea what the rest of it is, but yeah. But Wolf, I see you. Mandy, I see you. Eric, you better make sure. Yeah, I see you. Carl, I hope you feel better. First time I ever seen another crypt keeper. Yep. Kyle, where are you at? What happened? Maybe he'll come back home. Oh, here he is. What happened?
I have no idea. It just suddenly dropped. So,
drop it like it's hot.
Woohoo!
You got 20 minutes, brother.
Okay, so as I was saying, it turns out Ingram lives in a small town, population 3,800. Now, where this comes into play, I mentioned before that the very first mention of the Bell Witch, however, came in the History of Tennessee that was published in 1886. Now, the funny thing is, this particular section of the History of Tennessee was written by a man named Albert Virgil Goodpasture, who lived in Clarksville, Tennessee, up until just prior to the History of Tennessee being published. So Ingram and Goodpasture knew each other. And in and of itself, that's not really a smoking gun. But there's another factor that's going on. There is a game that was played in the 1880s called the Liars Club. And what the Liars Club is... No. It's not the Democratic Party.
No politics.
No politics. But the Liars Club is actually a game that newspapermen played all throughout the country in the 1880s. But actually 1870s, 1890s. This is the reason why, if you're watching Ancient Aliens, they can pull up a news story from the 1880s that talk about a cow being abducted by a flying object, or that talks about, anything just really bizarre. The game is whoever can tell the most a believable or unbelievable lie wins the prize. And the way it works, basically, everybody who plays would put in, and it changes, the money changes depending on the time. But let's say, just to keep it simple, everybody who plays is going to put in 5 cents a week. And of that kitty, when that's done, let's actually up it, just for, keep the math simple. 25 cents a week. Of that kitty, every single one of the players, whoever's told the best lie that particular week in their newspapers, will get 5 cents from every single person that played. The remaining 20 cents stays in the pot. Then whoever tells the best lie of the month gets 5 cents from each week from every player. Whoever tells the best lie of the year gets 15 cents for every month for every player. So it ends up that it's a huge way to make a lot of money from in 1880s terms.
Right.
Well, it turns out, as you dig into the history, Goodpasture won the year he published the history of Tennessee. We don't know why, just mysteriously he won. The year Ingram's book came out, he won for the year. Again, we don't know why, but if there's smoke, there's probably fire.
Yes.
So we find that that it's peculiar, and there are other things as you go through the book that again pointed away from being true. One of the biggest things is in the letters section. You'll hear a story about Andrew Jackson coming to Adams, Tennessee, to face down the terror, and there's a story about him encountering the entity and all of that. Well, it gives us a date range that he's supposed to have done this. He is one of the most well-documented men in the 1800s. He's a military officer. He has a secretary, and the secretary keeps a log. And so we know everywhere Andrew Jackson went, again, for 5 years before the Bell Witch and for 10, 15, 20 years after the Bell Witch. We know his every move. And he never went to Adams, Tennessee during that time period. So it's things like that that cast real doubt on the whole story.
Right.
And that's not a very popular thing to say in Adams, Tennessee, because they make a lot of money off tourists. I will say that the Bell Witch tourist trap it is based on a cave. The cave was on Bell property. There's no disputing that. However, the cave is about half a mile or more from where the cabin may have been, and it's really too far to have been used by the family regularly. It was used by the Shawnee Indians. I actually found an arrowhead while I was there. It was used as a cooler cave by the Shawnee. But that's it. The grave that's in the Bell Witch Cave was stolen from a burial ground down the road a few miles. The cabin on the Bell Witch Cave property is a reconstruction, so it's not even the real cabin. It actually has mannequins with a tape recorder to make them speak. But anyway, I digress. So it's very little about the actual Bell Witch Cave is the super creepy stuff you've heard. The Bell Witch cabin, the real one, is long since gone. One of their sons timbered it or lumbered it and made planks to build his house, which was later burned. Even where the real Bell burial was, it's kind of unknown. Right now, if you go to the Bell Witch, if you've seen some of the cheesy TV shows, when they go there, first of all, it's a memorial that's been put up by the family. The graves aren't the original graves. They're just representative. Further back in the woods, there is another set of representative graves, but none of them are confirmed to even have real bodies underneath.
Wow.
So it's all about the legend, which in and of itself isn't a bad thing. I mean, every town needs something to make them special, and this is their thing that makes them special. And belief is a powerful tool. You know, you've had people since the 1890s believing that the Bell Witch exists. So I'm not going to poo-poo on their beliefs. All I can do is I can point out what the real history is,
Right.
and do my best to spread it so people look at it and they say, you know, okay, maybe there is something else to this. And that's true with almost all famous paranormal cases. There's one exception that's not too famous, but almost every paranormal case, when you shine light on it, doesn't necessarily hold up. Whether it's the story behind the real story behind The Exorcist, or the real story behind Annalise Michael, the stories have become stories. They become part of the fabric of kind of pseudo horror, pseudo paranormal history. And it's up to folks like me to kind of unravel it. And as a demonologist, that's what I do. There may be let's say a paranormal investigator from somewhere in South Georgia may call up and say, hey, can you tell me about this demon Azazel? And so I'll go and I'll do some research and I'll say, well, you know, here's what I know. He's a real kitty cat. No, anyway. So, you know, it's those kind of things that as a paranormal investigator, I get called on to do. And, you know, no matter where it takes me, that's where I try to go.
Even the Moon River Brewery.
Even the Moon River Brewery, which is going away soon.
Yeah.
Yep.
We ain't losing nothing. We ain't losing nothing. But I will iterate what Kyle just said about Azazel. When I was doing a paranormal investigation, and well, I was talking to a lady about doing one, and I've never heard the word Azazel, never anything. Well, I went to Kyle with it, and it stuck. There's no other clown named Azazel, so here you go. There you go. What cool stuff you got coming up soon, Kyle?
Very little. COVID has. I have taken myself off the board. I still get hundreds of inquiries every month from people all over the world asking for help. Mm-hmm. But with COVID, it's a lot harder to get out in the field. I have done a few events with Ghost Hunt weekends, and I still try to. I also just got a new baby puppy. So that's going to keep me kind of homebound for a while. But I still field a lot of cases. And where I can help them, I do. I mean, even just before we went on the air, I mentioned that I had a lady contact me that had literally 70 haunted dolls. She was selling them on a certain auction site, and she got something really bad, and it was hurting her and her family. And so I had to work with her to unfortunately get rid of them and to prevent further problems. But I mean, it's that kind of thing. It's triaging. 99.9999% of the cases are not demonic. Just because a certain TV host gets possessed on his ghost party every week.
Alone now.
Yeah,
that's how long now.
Hey, he's a great businessman. I can't slight him, but nobody gets possessed that often. And the whole idea of demonic stuff is not what it seems on TV and in movies. Right. They're few and far between, and most of what I do when I'm on a real case like that is work to try to figure out what's really going on. Is the client off their meds? Do they need to be on meds? Have they watched one too many movies? Have they drank one too many cups of zombie coffee? You know, it's that kind of thing that we have to figure out. Oh, that rings a bell.
Messenger video.
So, you know that's the kind of thing we have to look at. And the Bell Witch is just one of dozens and dozens and dozens of historical cases that I've taken it on myself to try to come up with the real truth for.
Well, Kofi wants to know if you're banned in any other places besides the Bell Witch Cave.
Say that.
Are you banned
Oh,
anywhere else?
I'm sure there's a couple strip clubs. No, no. For the most part, the folks that I have proven or disproven their particular cases are older historical. I am in trouble with the new movie coming out. The Conjuring 3 deals with a case that I worked pretty heavily to disprove. I'm fairly outspoken against the Warrens because of some of the evidence that's come out over the years with them and a writer named Gerald Brittle, who actually wrote most of their books and has proven that they exaggerate. So that'll be the next kind of Kyle gets in trouble type case. But that's one that I've actually gone to the original sources and have written statements saying that they were coached in being possessed. So, but that's it. That's the only place I'm banned in. Is the Bell Witch.
So far.
Yeah.
So far.
So far.
Anybody got any questions to ask Kyle? He's probably like me, commando. He's probably got no underwear on. Well, we're waiting. Kyle, we have, I don't know if I've ever asked you before, but if you had your one bucket list place to investigate, just one, where would it be?
Honestly, I'm running out of them. I've been really blessed to go to a lot of really cool locations around the world. I think it would be really fun to actually spend some time in one of the British royal palaces. I've gotten to do some castles, and I've gotten to do some stuff, in really neat locations. We were talking before. I've been to Waverly a few times, and I mean, there's a lot of interesting places here in the States, but I want to kind of dig into some of the old history. One of the coolest things I got the chance to do was spend time down in Egyptian tombs by myself. Wow. And, I had one of my first real nasty paranormal experiences. I was down in the tomb of Seti I by myself. And as I was crawling back up the incline, I felt like a knife was being stuck in me. And I literally slid down, back down it, and had to crawl back up. So I've had a chance to be in a lot of really cool places. So, every place is an adventure. Sometimes they're not the hype.
Right.
You hear stories from people about, oh, this happens and this happens and this happens. Well, then you do the research of the history, and none of the history is true.
Right.
And then you get there, and there's really not anything going on. I do usually pimp when people ask me about paranormal. I do mention one of my favorite places called the Thomas House.
Oh, yeah.
Super cool place outside of Red Boiling Springs, Tennessee. I've been there over 180 nights. It's always an experience. I just got to go to do a new place. About a month ago, I went on a 1,600-mile round trip, and I went to a little place called Benham, Kentucky. And there's a coal mining strip of several little cities. And we had done a thing, and I did it with Ghost Hunt Weekends, full disclosure. It was the first time that any of us had been there. And I had the opportunity to lead a group into the mine. And there's a shaft that's about 5,000 feet long as one of the offshoots. And so at one end, I put 10 or so tourists. And at the other end, I put 10 or so tourists. And the idea is they are having a ghost experience or a ghost hunting experience themselves. While I'm walking between the location, right in the middle of the shaft. So I'm thousands of feet away from anybody. I've got two folks with me on my staff working. There are these mannequin statues of like miners in different time periods. And from right behind them, a person as clear as you and me walks out in a khaki mining suit with a hard hat on and crosses over the mining cart and turns and goes down the shaft. And my flashlight is hitting it. So it is stopped. It's actually just like you and me.
Right.
So you just never know when you're going to get something super amazing. And, you know, I was a doubter. I was like, there's nothing, you're not going to find anything in a mine, yada, yada, yada. It blew my mind. So, you know, you just never know. So when you give me a hard question like bucket list, every place that's really haunted is on the bucket list.
Right. Well, I want to get to the Roman Colosseum.
The Roman Colosseum is amazing.
I want to go there so bad.
Yeah. You know, I had the great opportunity. I worked briefly north of Venice. And so I got to spend a lot of time traveling Rome and all of Italy. And I fell so in love with the country that I would go about every other Christmas to go spend time in Pompeii and to go to Rome, to go down to the Forum area. And it should be on everybody's bucket list.
Oh, yeah. Last question.
Yeah.
Amityville House.
I have not been there because it is a private residence. I will say that Amityville was, all right, I mentioned earlier before the clash with The Conjuring. One of the things that happened when The Conjuring movie came out, a gentleman named Gerald Brittle sued the movie studio. He said, I have a contract, and he produced it, with the Warrens saying that he was their writer and that he got residuals on anything that they wrote. The movie studio said, no, this is a historical event. And Mr. Brittle said, you may want to rethink that. And eventually the lawsuit kept going up and up with every Conjuring movie. And it eventually got to be over $1 billion with a B dollars.
Wow.
In residuals. And when it went to discovery, Mr. Brittle or his attorneys walk in with boxes and boxes of reel-to-reel tapes and notebooks where they sat around the table and made up the story of The Conjuring. And made up the story of, to our point, Amityville. So, you know, the background story of the murders and all that did happen. But the story that makes Amityville so famous, the Red Room and all of this, all made up. And the people who lived there from the time they got out, the time the Amityville story ends, forward, no paranormal activity.
Right.
Not a single one ever reported from anybody. You know, they've taken the windows out that were so famous and remodeled. So there's nothing to investigate there, at least according to the owners.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you very much for being with us tonight. I hope everybody learned a lot of stuff. Kyle, I do appreciate you and everything you've done for me, my group, everything like that. Thank you. Make sure you get some puppies for me tonight.
I will.
Give them a good hug. Thank you very much. Hellfire, thank y'all very much for watching. Anything to plug real quick? Anything you got going on?
Well, I guess somewhere, if I've got it. I've got a book. It actually came out a year ago, but it came out literally the day the world ended. So no one read it. And actually, it has a section in it on Azazel. It's called Forgotten Lore. And basically, this is Kyle looking at a bunch of demons and looking at what their real story is. So this one's been out, like I said, it came out literally when the world ended a year ago. And I'm really proud of this one. I will say it is the most scholastic book I've ever written. And so it's not an easy read. I will tell you that.
Right.
But the idea is to teach folks. I do spend some time, again, kind of relooking at what is demonology, what's the ideas of Eastern and Western, how do those differ? And then actually going through and doing what I do, proving or disproving. And I guess the teaser on this book, I may or may not have disproven Lucifer.
Wow. So you'll have to get the book to figure out what he's talking about. But ladies and gentlemen, thank y'all very much. And Sunday night, don't forget Bedtime Stories with Azazel. See y'all later. Pickers, keep picking. Sinners, keep sinning. And everybody, have them nightmares. Bye.
When I'm screaming, fuck you. Middle finger in the air, but no one wanted to hear what you screaming. Fuck you too. I'm running this stratosphere in a brand new atmosphere. I wanna go and shoot to the campus clear, cause I never thought I would've made it out of here alive. From the land where the people put the evil of night ride. You'll never see an equal to my kind, so blind to anything to line the light to mind this right now. Looking for another mind to fight foul, bringing everything that you can bring down to the ground like 150 pounds of C4, looking for keyboard thugs. Well, I'ma need more slugs, cause I wanna see more blood. You ain't never seen gold like us. They don't wanna make them any more like us. Put them on tour with the paint on them, but anybody can know your little lane song. Fuck right, I'ma stay wrong. Black out with a ray gun, looking for anybody to make up. Motherfuckers really need to wake up. There's something really you can say. It's never gonna change my mind. I'm on some fuck that shit today. Fuck it, I don't care. Middle fingers in the air. Only count is up in here. Only count is up in here. Say fuck it, I don't care. Middle fingers in the air. Only count is up in here. Only count is up in here.
Fuck that! I said fuck this shit. I was born a son of a bitch and always talk a whole gang of shit. Even know that I wouldn't work fit. Now till I became a bastard. Whole world revel in the wake of my damn disaster. Had to talk to a pastor. Told me sit down, handle my shit, and try to figure out what the fuck's really the matter. Ain't none of my city, only nigga and wicked is the last. Addicted from your own personal promises. I never know peace is an emphasis. Therefore, cover up all the scars and all my blemishes. These